Headphones on, lights out. 16 true stories told in the rain. You don't have to stay awake for this one. Volume 1. Saturday mornings belong to the early birds, and after 40 years appraising estates for a regional auction house, I am the earliest bird in Ashford County. By 7:15, I was parked outside 3416 Willow Court, watching a woman I didn't know set up card tables in the gray light. A Mr. Coffee percolator gurgled on the porch rail behind her. The sign had said, "Estate sale. Everything must go." But this was a garage sale in the truest sense. Mismatched dish sets, a broken Singer sewing machine, board games missing half their pieces. I have an eye, 40 years of it, and the eye went straight past the folding tables to a small wooden box sitting alone near the garage door, priced at $4 in ballpoint pen. I almost didn't pick it up. $4 boxes don't usually earn their own square of pavement, set apart from the folding tables like something under quarantine. I noticed the price tag wasn't taped down the way the others were. It had been pinned through the wood itself, a straight pin, driven into the grain, as if someone wanted it fixed there permanently, unable to fall off or be swapped for a different number. That struck me as strange before I'd even touched the thing, and 40 years in this business have taught me to trust that particular kind of strange. It was walnut, hand-carved, the dovetail joints so tight I couldn't slide a fingernail into the seam. Rosettes along the lid, worn smooth by handling. $4 for joinery like that. Someone hadn't looked closely, or hadn't wanted to. I told myself it was factory work dressed up to look hand-cut. That happens more than people think, especially with reproduction pieces sold off as antiques. But factory dovetails don't taper. These did, each pin narrowing by degrees so slight you'd need calipers to prove it. The kind of patience no assembly line has ever been paid for. I ran my thumb along the rosettes and found no two identical, though from arm's length they matched perfectly, as if the maker wanted the illusion of sameness without ever quite committing to it. I called the woman over. "Denise," she said, helping her mother-in-law clear the house before new owners moved in. I asked about the box. She looked at it the way you'd look at a dog that had bitten someone once. "That one's not really for sale," she said. Then, after a pause too long to be casual, "Actually, take it. $4. Just take it." I should have left it at that, but as I lifted the box off the table, Denise's hand shot out. Not to stop me exactly, more like the reflex of someone steadying a glass she already knew was going to fall anyway. "Take it," she said again, softer this time, in the tone people use apologizing to someone who isn't the one they've wronged. Behind her, the percolator on the porch rail had gone quiet, though no one had turned it off. Behind her, chalk hopscotch squares had bled pink and blue into the driveway concrete, half-washed by some forgotten rain. Near the garage doorframe, pencil marks climbed a growth chart that simply stopped, mid-column, at the height of a child of maybe 8. The last mark was dated in handwriting too careful for a child's, June 1987. I glanced back once as I carried the box to the car, and the chalk squares looked brighter than they had a minute before, though the sky hadn't cleared and no one had touched them. Denise wasn't looking at the hopscotch anymore. She was looking at the growth chart, the way you look at a door you've decided, a long time ago, never to open again. I thought about asking what had happened after June of that year, and then I thought better of it. I didn't ask. You learn, in this business, which questions people will actually answer, and Denise had the look of someone who'd already answered enough for one morning. I paid my $4 and carried the box to my car, like a man carrying something far heavier than $4 ought to buy. The box sat on the passenger seat the whole drive home, and twice I caught myself checking it out of the corner of my eye, the way you'd check on a sleeping animal you weren't entirely sure was asleep. It was lighter than walnut that size had any right to be. I'd have guessed pine, if I hadn't already felt the density of it settle in my palms back in that driveway. $4, I kept thinking, the number turning over and over like a coin I couldn't quite spend. At home, under the lamp in my study, I turned it over properly. No keyhole, no hinge pins I could find. Just a hairline seam running the entire circumference. And the wood was warm. Warmer than a box that had sat outside all morning had any right to be. I blamed the radiator first, running hotter than usual on a cold night, the kind of thing an old house does without explanation. But I'd left the radiator off. I always do, out of habit, before I sit down to work. And when I checked the vents anyway, foolishly, twice, they sat cold and dry under my palm both times. The box, meanwhile, had grown warmer than my study, warmer than my own hand pressed flat against the wood. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the chalk squares, the growth chart that stopped. So I did what I always do with a good provenance question. I went looking for the paper trail. Ashford Gazette Archives, June 1987. A girl named Lucy Vance, age 8, reported missing from 3416 Willow Court. Last seen playing in the yard while her father worked in his shop. Case never closed. Her father, the article noted, was a woodworker. I sat with that for a long time. A woodworker in that house in that year, and in my hands, a box built by someone who clearly knew what he was doing. Better than most professionals I'd certified in 4 decades of this work. I kept reading. The Gazette ran a follow-up 2 weeks later, thinner, buried near the obituaries. The father had told police he'd been in his workshop the entire afternoon, in full view of the yard, and had seen nothing unusual. No one in that article seemed to ask why a man with a clear view of his own daughter had also, in that same stretch of afternoon, finished a piece of joinery that should have taken a skilled man days, not hours. The paper didn't dwell on it. I found I couldn't stop. I found the second seam near midnight, running my thumbnail along the base out of pure habit. I always check for false bottoms. It's the first thing they teach you, and the first thing amateurs forget. There was give in the wood, the faintest breath of movement where none should exist. My hands weren't quite steady by then, though I told myself that was only the hour, only the coffee I hadn't eaten enough to justify. The desk lamp flickered once, so briefly I decided not to trust that it had happened at all. Somewhere beneath the false bottom, something shifted its weight, small, deliberate, patient as a held breath, waiting, it seemed, to see whether I'd go any further. I pressed. The base shifted a fraction of an inch, and from inside the box came a sound I told myself was the joint settling, a small high exhale, almost a word. I should have stopped there. 40 years handling other people's treasures, and I still didn't stop. I pressed harder. The base slid free all at once, and inside the false compartment was a child's hair ribbon, faded from red to the color of dried roses, coiled around something that caught the lamplight like a small tooth. Beneath it, impossibly, warmth. The same warmth as the outer wood, but stronger now, rising against my palm like breath against a cold window. The room's temperature dropped so fast my ears popped. Something in that compartment was very small and very patient, and it had been waiting, I understood all at once, for someone with exactly my eye. Someone who would know to check for a false bottom. Someone who wouldn't stop at $4 worth of curiosity. The seam along the lid split wider than the wood should allow, and light, pale, thin, the color of a hallway at 3 a.m., spilled out across my desk. I heard a child's laugh, close to my ear, delighted. Then a small hand made of cold air closed around my wrist and pulled. They found my house empty 3 days later, the lamp still burning, the box closed again on my desk. No seam, no hinge, priced at $4 in ballpoint pen, sitting on a card table at my own estate sale the following Saturday. My daughter sold it to a retired antiques dealer from 2 counties over. She said he had a very good eye. Story 2. It was the kind of dead summer Tuesday where the only thing on my calendar was refilling my water bottle. I was biking loops around Larch Court because the Simmons pool was closed for cleaning, and that's when I saw the sign. Handwritten, black marker, staked crooked in the grass outside 4118. The empty house. The one that's been empty since the Halversons moved to Scottsdale back when I was in 7th grade. Moving sale, the sign said. Everything must go. I remember thinking, moving where? Nobody's lived there in 3 years. But the driveway had card tables lined with lamps and dishes, and a woman in a yellow sundress was waving at me like she already knew my name. The lawn was was a mess of dead crabgrass except for one perfect rectangle around the tables, mowed so clean it looked painted on. I told myself somebody probably just tidied up for the sale. That's the kind of thing you tell yourself when you're 15 and bored and there's a boy about my age folding jackets over a card table, glancing up at me like I was the only interesting thing on the street. Every price tag I picked up said the same thing. $19, a toaster, a rocking chair, a stack of paperbacks with cracked spines. $19 in the same tidy cursive, like one person had written every single tag in one sitting. I picked up the rocking chair's price tag again, just to be sure I'd read it right, and turned it over looking for a different number on the back. There wasn't one. I told myself maybe they'd bought a single roll of tags on sale, the kind you get in bulk at an office store, and just used whatever number came printed on the sticker. That explanation held up for about as long as it took me to notice the boy's jacket, the one he kept folding over and over, though he never actually set it down in a box. I asked the woman in yellow if they were the new owners. She smiled without showing teeth and said, "Something like that, sweetheart. We're just clearing things out before it's somebody else's turn." Her husband didn't look up from the lamp he was pricing. Neither did the boy. It struck me, standing there, that none of them had looked at each other once. Not when she called him over, not when he handed her change from an old cigar box. They only ever looked at me, like I was the one thing in the yard actually worth watching. I decided the not looking at each other thing was probably just how families get after living in close quarters too long, the way my own parents stopped finishing each other's sentences somewhere around my 10th birthday. That theory felt almost comfortable until I realized none of them had blinked in the time I'd been standing there. Not the woman, not her husband, not the boy. I told myself it was the sun in my eyes, and I believed it exactly as much as I needed to keep standing in that driveway. I told myself it was small-town friendliness, the kind my mom always says died out before I was born. I told myself the mowed rectangle was a rental company's doing, prepping the house to be shown. I told myself a lot of things standing in that driveway, because the alternative was admitting something about that yard felt wrong in a way I didn't have a word for yet. The cicadas, so loud 2 houses down, went dead silent the second I stepped onto their grass. I only noticed because it came back the second I stepped off it. The boy, nobody had told me his name, and I never got around to asking, pointed me toward a shoebox of photographs on the porch steps, said his mom wanted them gone too, said, "People pay for other people's memories all the time at these things. You'd be surprised." I flipped through them mostly out of politeness. Then I found one of this exact driveway, same card tables, same lamps, same woman in the same yellow sundress, same boy folding the same jacket. On the back in that tidy cursive, August 14th, last year's date. I stood there doing the math twice, because a photograph can't show a yard sale before the yard sale happens, unless it wasn't the first one. I set the photograph back in the shoebox like it might do something if I held it too long. Underneath it was another, same driveway, same tables, and the date on the back was 2 years earlier, the tidy cursive identical down to the loop on the 8. A third photograph, a fourth. I stopped counting somewhere around 6, because by then the dates went back further than the Halversons had even lived there, and none of the faces in the yard ever changed. The woman must have noticed me staring because she offered me a glass of water and said the kitchen sink still worked if I didn't mind stepping inside a minute. I don't know why I said yes. Boredom, maybe, or the particular kind of curiosity that gets written up later as a bad decision in a police report. The screen door didn't creak. It didn't make any sound at all, like it had opened and closed 1,000 times before mine, and worn smooth. The hallway carpet had a path worn into it, a pale trail from the front door to the kitchen, the exact width of a person's feet dragged rather than walked. I told myself old houses just wear that way, foot traffic over decades, though nobody had lived here in 3 years by every account I'd ever heard. The air conditioning wasn't running, but the kitchen was cold enough to raise the hair on my arms, cold in a way that didn't match the heat still baking through the windows. Inside, the air smelled like a house that's been closed up too long, dust and hot vinyl and something faintly like a birthday candle just blown out. Boxes were stacked in the hallway with the same $19 tags on the flaps, unopened. A grandfather clock in the front room had stopped at 6:47 and nobody had bothered to wind it. In the kitchen, the drawer liner was a folded newspaper, yellowed at the edges, and the date at the top stopped me cold. August 14th, same year as the photograph. The headline underneath the water glass was half torn, but I could still read 2 words before I set the glass down too fast. Family. Found. I told myself the torn headline could have said anything. Family found safe, family found home, 100 harmless endings that just happened to stop where the paper stopped. I almost convinced myself of that, right up until I noticed the second drawer liner underneath the first, another newspaper, another August 14th, a year further back, the same 2 visible words torn off in exactly the same place. Someone had done that on purpose. Someone had done that more than once. I didn't finish reading it. I told myself I didn't want to be rude, snooping through someone's kitchen drawer, but really I think some part of me already understood and was trying very hard not to. A year ago today, in this house, on this exact driveway, something had happened to this family. Something bad enough to make the newspaper, something they'd never actually left. And now, 12 months later, to the day, they were doing it all again. Selling the same lamps, folding the same jacket, waiting the way you'd wait for a bus, for somebody exactly like me to wander up their driveway. I started backing toward the hallway without really deciding to, the glass of water still sweating in my hand. And that's when the temperature dropped again, sharper this time, enough that my breath should have shown and didn't. I remember thinking that was wrong before I understood why. And then I heard someone else breathing in the house besides me, slow and even from somewhere I couldn't see yet. That's when I noticed the 4th person. Standing at the edge of the hallway, half in shadow, was a woman I hadn't seen at the tables. Older, maybe 30, wearing clothes about 10 years out of style, staring at nothing with the same smile the other 3 had been wearing at me all afternoon. I asked the boy who she was. He looked for the first time all day uncomfortable. She came by last year, he said. She's part of it now. Everybody who stays long enough is part of it now. I don't remember deciding to run. I remember the screen door again, silent, and the driveway sun exactly where it had been 40 minutes ago, like the whole afternoon had been holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do. The woman in yellow called after me, not angry, just patient, the way you'd call after someone who forgot their change. You don't have to go yet, sweetheart. Everything's still half price. I didn't look back at the tables. I didn't look back at the 4th woman in the hallway. I got on my bike 2 houses down and didn't stop pedaling until my own street, my own driveway, my own mother asking why I looked like I'd seen a ghost, and me saying with a laugh that didn't sound like mine, that it was just hot out. I never told her the rest. I never went back down Larch Court, not once, not even the long way to school. I told myself it was over, that whatever that place was, I'd left it behind on that driveway, still smiling, still holding its $19 tags. For 11 months, I almost believed it. Then, last August, on the 14th, I rode past out of some habit I can't explain, and the sign was back up. Same handwriting, same tables, and on the porch steps, next to a shoebox of photographs, somebody had already priced my bike helmet at $19. Black, chipped visor, my name still in the strap in Sharpie, like I'd left it there myself and simply hadn't noticed yet. Story 3. Saturday, 9:14 a.m., already pushing 86 degrees outside Mesquite, Texas. I'd been driving for a delivery app called Cart Mule about 6 months, mostly groceries, sometimes furniture nobody wanted to load themselves. That morning it pinged an easy one. Pick up a folding lawn chair from a yard sale on Foxglove Lane, drop it 9 minutes away, $8. Client said it was for her porch. The house at 114 Foxglove had the usual spread, card tables, a busted microwave, kids' bikes with flat tires. An older woman named Ruth ran the register out of a cigar box. The lawn chair sat off to the side, folded shut, a strip of masking tape across the seat that read "Reserved," someone's handwriting scratched out underneath in a different pen. The chair itself looked ordinary enough. Aluminum frame, faded green webbing, a rust spot on one leg shaped like a thumbprint. But the shadow it threw across the grass didn't match the sun. Everything else in that yard threw long morning shadows toward the house. The chairs fell the other way, toward the street, like it was already leaning to leave. I told myself it was just the angle of the frame. I didn't look at it again while I paid. I asked Ruth about the tape. She didn't look up from making change. "Ignore that," she said. "Somebody always reserves it. Nobody ever comes back for it." I laughed. She didn't. I asked her who'd written "reserved" in the first place. Ruth shrugged and said different people, different summers. She'd stopped scratching out the names because there were too many. Fella from 2 sales back wrote his own name on it, she said. Died before he could pick it up. She said it the way you'd mention rain later in the week, then went back to counting quarters like she hadn't said anything at all. I folded it back down and carried it to the truck. My truck bed already had a box fan and a mini fridge from another job, so I buckled the chair into the back seat instead. Easier than restacking. Habit, not thought. Ruth called after me, not a goodbye, more like small talk with teeth in it. "It rides better than it looks," she said. "Just don't let it ride shotgun." I figured she meant my shocks. 2 minutes down Foxglove, my dash read 71 degrees. At the stop sign on Crescent, it read 63. I told myself the AC compressor was finally dying, same thing the mechanic warned me about last month. I cracked my window, thinking maybe the sensor was just reading the outside air wrong, and the smell that came in wasn't exhaust or cut grass. It was cold, mineral, like the inside of a refrigerator that had been unplugged a long time. It lasted 3 seconds and then it was gone, swallowed back up by the usual asphalt heat. I closed the window and turned the AC to its lowest setting, just so I'd have something familiar to point at. At the light on Route 9, I heard the seatbelt in the back seat click into place. I looked. The chair was still folded, straps hanging loose against the cushion. I unbuckled it myself before pulling forward, more annoyed than anything. I checked the rear view twice before the light changed, half expecting the belt to click again just to prove me wrong. It didn't, but the radio, which had been playing a country station since I left the yard sale, cut to static for exactly the length of the red light, then came back the second I touched the gas. I didn't mention it to anyone. There was no one to mention it to. 3 blocks later, the truck listed to the right, like the weight had shifted. I glanced over my shoulder. The chair had opened itself and the seatbelt sat buckled snug across it, exactly the way a passenger wears one. I told myself a dozen things standing on that shoulder. Bad latch, pothole, my own tired eyes playing tricks after a double shift. None of it explained why the cushion held a shape too narrow for a sack of mulch and too deep for empty air, like something had sat there long enough to leave a memory in the foam. None of it explained the seatbelt either, which locks hard on impact, not gently, not on its own, not with a soft, patient click. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazards on, and checked the load myself. Chair open, belt fastened, cushion pressed down in the shallow shape of somebody who'd been sitting there. Warm, even with the AC blasting. I told myself road vibration popped the latch. I refolded it, threw it in the bed instead, and got back on the highway. Merging back onto Route 9, I caught myself checking the mirror more than the road, watching the shape in the bed instead of the traffic behind me. Every time the truck hit a seam in the asphalt, the chair rocked, and every time it rocked like it was settling rather than bouncing. Small, controlled, almost polite. I turned the radio up loud enough to drown out the metal-on-metal creak of the frame shifting, and told myself the sound was just physics. The drop-off was a beige rental on Thistlewood Court, porch light already on, though it wasn't dark yet. A woman about my age opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been watching from the window. She looked past me at the truck bed and went pale. She didn't ask my name or sign anything on the tablet. She just stood in the doorway with one hand braced on the frame, staring at the chair like it might climb out of the truck bed on its own. Her porch light, the one already burning in broad daylight, buzzed once and dimmed, she flinched like she'd heard that exact sound too many times before to call it a coincidence. "Where did you get that?" she said. Not really a question. I told her. "Yard sale, Foxglove Lane, $8. She said her uncle used to own that chair. Said he disappeared 3 winters ago walking home from a bar off Route 9. Found 2 days later a mile from the shoulder, sitting upright against a fence post, like he'd just stopped to rest. She told me the fence post detail like she'd rehearsed it, flat and fast, the way you get through something you've had to explain too many times. Then she added something she said she'd never told anyone outside her family, that when they found her uncle, his hands were folded in his lap, palms up, like he'd been waiting for someone to place something in them. "It doesn't belong to the chair," she told me. "Something rides in it. It gets carried until it finds a house it likes, and whoever carries it last is the one it remembers." She wouldn't take it, wouldn't let me leave it on her porch either. She shut the door on "but the app says," before I finished the sentence. I asked her why she didn't just call the police, tell someone, do something official with what she knew. She laughed, short and humorless, and said the police had already closed her uncle's file as a cold weather accident. Exposure, bad luck. "Try telling them a chair walked him out to that fence post," she said. "I'd rather it just go somewhere else, anywhere else." Then, quieter, she asked if I'd felt anything sitting in the truck alone with it. I said no. I didn't tell her about the smell or the cushion or the belt. I drove to the county dump off Route 9 to leave it in the scrap pile, popped the tailgate, set the chair down myself, watched a forklift push a mattress 6 feet away, got back in, started the engine, and in the side mirror I watched the chair unfold, slow, like it was stretching after a long sit. By the time I hit the exit ramp, the seat belt in my back seat was buckled again. I never went back to check if the chair was still at the dump. I told myself it didn't matter, it was just a chair. That night I slept with the porch light on, both doors locked, telling myself it was just an old chair and a bad afternoon. Around 6:02 the app buzzed. New pickup request, my own address. Item description: 1 folding lawn chair, gently used. Buyer already paid in full. I hadn't listed anything for sale. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Carol from Ohio. She asked us to just play it as she left it. So here it is, mostly unedited. "I went back to my mom's house on Larkspur Lane last month," she says, "to start clearing it out. She passed in March. I hadn't been back to that street since I was maybe 11. There was a yard sale sign 2 doors down at the old Voss place, hand-painted, kind of crooked. I remembered that family a little. So on my second afternoon there, bored out of my mind sorting my mother's closet, I walked over, folding tables on the lawn, a Fisher-Price cassette recorder, a stack of encyclopedias, the tan kind with the gold letters, exact same set we had growing up. Everything had a price tag, handwritten, in that same silver marker I'd noticed later on. 50 cents on the encyclopedias, a quarter on the cassette recorder. I remember thinking that was strange because yard sale stickers fade. They curl up in the sun after a season, and these looked like they'd been written that morning, every single one, in the exact same hand. I picked up a Trapper Keeper, the purple one with the unicorn on the front. There were initials on the inside flap in silver marker. CM, my initials. I told myself, okay, lots of kids had those initials. Lots of kids had unicorns. Then I found the diary underneath it. Pink cover, little brass lock, the lock already broken. My name was written on the first page in my own handwriting. I told myself the initials thing was nothing, that plenty of families reused old school supplies, that somebody probably bought a box of them wholesale decades ago. But Trapper Keepers didn't come blank like that. You wrote your own initials in with whatever marker was closest, at whatever angle your hand happened to be at that age. Mine were slanted a specific way, the C too small, the M dragging low, and that's exactly how they sat on the flap in my hand. I never sold that diary. I never donated it. My mother told me when I was 13 that it burned in a house fire we had in the garage. That's the story I grew up with. Standing there on that lawn, holding it, I remember thinking, okay, maybe Mom lied about the fire. Maybe she just gave it away years later and never told me. People do that. Parents get rid of things. I flipped past the first few pages anyway, just to catch myself in the lie. The handwriting matched down to the little loop I used to put on my lowercase L's, a habit my third grade teacher spent a whole year trying to correct out of me. I hadn't written a lowercase L that way since I was maybe 12. Nobody forges a habit you don't even remember having. But then I found the box of school papers, a whole shoebox of them. My spelling test from 2nd grade, graded in red. Permission slips with my mother's signature. A get well card I made for a teacher in 4th grade that I know for a fact I handed in. Things that go home with a child or into a school dumpster and never come back. I stood there in that yard sale holding 25 years of paper that somebody had been quietly collecting the whole time. The shoebox smelled like the inside of my old desk at school, pencil shavings and glue stick, a smell I hadn't caught in 20 years and wouldn't have been able to name if you'd asked me to guess it blind. My hands were shaking a little by then, not from fear exactly, more like the feeling of stepping on a stair that isn't where you thought it would be. That's when a man came around from the side of the house, older, thin, wearing a cardigan even though it was August. I recognized him before I wanted to. Mr. Voss, from 2 doors down, the one who used to wave at me from his porch every single morning while I waited for the school bus. He smiled and said, "I knew you'd come back eventually, Carol. Nobody else ever buys anything. I just leave it out for you." I want to say I turned and left right then. I didn't. I stood there running the math in my head. 6 years, every single morning. He must have set those tables up and taken them down again. Waiting. And I kept landing on the same stupid question. Waiting for what exactly if nobody else on the street would even stop? I asked him what he meant. Nobody else buys anything. He said the sale's been up for 6 years. Same tables, same boxes. He just keeps rotating what's on top so it looks fresh from the road. Nobody stops except me because everyone else on that street already knows better than to. I laughed a little because it sounded like a joke. He wasn't smiling anymore by the time I stopped laughing. The street behind him was empty in a way I hadn't noticed walking over. No cars in driveways, no sprinklers running, nothing, even though it was the middle of a summer afternoon. I remember thinking that was just Larkspur Lane being Larkspur Lane, quiet, like it always was. I didn't let myself think about why every house on that block might have learned, a long time ago, to keep their blinds shut past 3 in the afternoon. He said there was more inside, if I wanted to see it properly, boxes he'd kept separate for me specifically. And I want you to understand, some small, stupid part of me was thinking about my mother's estate. Thinking maybe he had things of hers too, things I could take home, so I followed him, across the yard, past the fence gap I used to cut through as a kid to get to his house faster. I hadn't thought about that shortcut in 25 years. My feet remembered it before I did. The screen door didn't creak the way I remembered it creaking when I was a kid, sneaking through that same gap in the fence. It opened silent, easy, like it got used every day. My mother used to warn me about that house, actually, in a way I never thought much about until right now, sitting in my car. She never said why. She just said, "Don't go past the fence, Carol." And I always figured that was just a mom thing to say. Inside, the house smelled like my grandmother's, like old carpet and something sweet gone slightly wrong. Boxes floor to ceiling in the front hallway. Every single one labeled in that same silver marker, my initials, and a year, 1998, 2003, 2011. Years I hadn't lived on that street, years after I'd already moved 4 states away and hadn't told a single neighbor where I'd gone. He said, very quietly, that he'd never actually sold anything. Not one item. Not ever, in 6 years of putting tables out. He said the sale was never for the neighborhood. It was for me. He said, "I just needed you to walk close enough on your own that I wouldn't have to come get you." I've been patient. Your mother made me promise to be patient. I want to be honest, I don't remember every second after that clearly. I remember a door at the end of the hallway that I know for a fact wasn't part of that house's original floor plan, because I used to play in that house as a kid before he moved in, and that wall used to just be a wall. I remember getting out. I don't fully know how. I'm in my car right now, in the driveway, doors locked, and I'm not going to explain that part any further than that. I still have the diary. I grabbed it off the table before I ran. I looked through it again tonight, in a hotel 2 towns over. Most of the entries are mine, my handwriting, exactly as I remember writing them at 11 years old. But the last entry isn't. It's dated yesterday. My name's Frank Delaney, and for the last 6 years I've walked the night shift at Lockridge Self-Storage off Route 9, badge number 1 and 18, ex-Suffolk County PD, before my knees gave out. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., alone except for the gate radio and a thermos of Folgers gone lukewarm by midnight. 640 units, 7 aisles, 1 Ford Explorer with a check engine light that's been on since Obama's second term. I know every rattle this place makes. That's how I knew, the night everything changed, that C-14 was making a sound it had no business making. The walkthrough is the same every night. I clock in, sign the sheet, drive the perimeter fence twice, then walk aisles A through F on foot with a streamlight in my left hand and a clipboard in my right. 47 minutes, door to door, if I don't stop for coffee. Dispatch, a kid named Denny working out of the Bridgeport office. Checks in every 2 hours on Channel 3. It's boring. It's supposed to be boring. Unit C-14 sat empty since the day I started. No furniture, no boxes, just a slab of gray concrete and a padlock some renter named RH put on it back in March and never came back to open. Rent gets paid through an auto-pay drop box. Cash, always exact. Gail in the front office told me once that nobody at corporate had ever actually met RH in person. I didn't think about that again for 4 years. It was a Tuesday in October when I first heard it. I was 3 units down from C-14, and something inside shifted. A soft thud, then a drag, like a box being pushed an inch across bare concrete. I stood there a good 30 seconds. The padlock on C-14 was exactly where it always was, dust-caked and untouched. Raccoons, I told myself. We'd had a possum in aisle B the year before. I wrote it in the log anyway, force of habit from the job. 10:42 p.m., possible animal activity, unit C-14, no forced entry. Gail laughed about it the next morning over coffee. I laughed too. That was the last night laughing came easy in this place. 3 nights later, I came around the corner of aisle C and my flashlight caught something that made my stomach drop before my brain caught up. The door of C-14 was open 6 inches, not broken, not forced, just open. And behind it, stacked floor to ceiling, were boxes. Brown moving boxes, the kind you buy flat-packed at a U-Haul counter, taped shut, stacked in rows that went back farther than a single 10 by 10 unit should physically allow. No delivery truck had come through the gate. I'd have logged it. I log every vehicle, every plate. It's the first thing they taught me at the academy and the last habit the job never let go of. I checked the sign-in sheet at the front kiosk. Nothing. I checked the gate code history. Nothing after 9:58 p.m., which was me coming on shift. The next morning I asked Gail to pull the camera footage with me. Camera 4 covers aisle C dead on, has for years. We watched 2 hours of tape at 4 times speed. At 11:14 p.m., the feed jumps. Not a cut, not a glitch, just 11 seconds of gray static. And when it clears, the boxes are already there. I checked the lease file myself, something I had no real authority to do. RH rented C-14 in March for $112 a month. Cash, auto-pay, no move-in inspection requested, no last name on record, no phone number that connected to a real line. Gail said corporate had flagged 3 other units like that over the years, at 3 other Lockridge locations, all eventually reported as, in her words, resolved. She wouldn't say what resolved meant. I should have left it there. the next 2 weeks, my walkthrough started running long. 47 minutes became 51, then 53, and I didn't notice until Denny asked why my check-ins kept drifting later on Channel 3. I told him I was getting old. I didn't tell him that every night, without meaning to. I found myself standing in front of C14 for minutes I couldn't account for, staring at a door that hadn't moved. There was a smell that came with it, wet cardboard, and underneath that, something sweeter, like a butcher's cooler left unplugged. It followed me. I'd get back in the Explorer, and it would be on my jacket, on my hands, and no amount of the little pine tree air freshener on the mirror made it go away. Gail said she didn't smell anything when she inspected the unit in daylight. By daylight, she was probably telling the truth. The boxes kept coming. Every few nights, more of them, stacked tighter, no gap in the door bigger than a mail slot now. And they weren't stacked like storage. Nobody stacks storage the way you'd stack sandbags around something you were trying to protect or contain. From the sliver I could see the shape in the middle of that unit had a curve to it, like a rib cage built out of moving boxes. That was the night I decided the padlock was coming off, badge or no badge. I waited until 2 a.m., the deadest hour on the deadest night of the week, and used the bolt cutters from the maintenance shed instead of calling it in. The lock gave with a sound like a knuckle popping. I want to be honest about what I felt standing in front of that door. Not fear yet, just a cop's old itch, the one that never lets a locked room stay locked. I pulled the door up on its track, slow, the chain rattling through my palm, and my streamlight found the inside of C14 for the first time in 6 years. The boxes went back farther than the wall should have allowed, stacked in a hollow ring, and in the center of that ring, low to the floor, the cardboard was moving, not settling, not shifting, moving the way a chest moves when something underneath it is asleep. I got closer than any sane man should have. Up near the seam of one box, scratched into the cardboard in what looked like fingernail, or something worse, were tally marks, long rows of them, 4 strikes and a slash, over and over, hundreds deep. I counted my own patrols in my head without meaning to. 47 minutes a night, times 6 years. The number in my head and the number scratched into that box were the same. It wasn't storing anything. I understood that the way you understand a fall a half second before you hit the ground. All at once, too late to stop it. Every night I walked past that unit. Every time I stood there for those extra unaccounted minutes, something on the other side of that padlock had been logging me. My route, my smell, my breath. It had been feeding on the routine the same way a plant leans toward a window. The boxes in front of me split open along the seams, not torn, unfolded, like something inside had learned exactly how cardboard works. Under the flaps there wasn't packing paper or old furniture. There was skin the color of a wet grocery bag, rising and falling, and a smell of ammonia so thick I gagged before I ran. I got maybe 10 feet before my radio went to static, full white noise, the kind that means the transmitter's dead, not just out of range. I hit the panic button on my belt clip anyway. Nothing. I ran for the Explorer, and behind me I heard cardboard tearing itself into long, wet strips, faster than paper should tear, faster than anything with a spine should move. The gate wouldn't take my code. 4471, the same 4 digits I'd punched in 6,000 nights running, and the little red light just blinked at me like it didn't know who I was anymore. I climbed the fence instead, at 51 years old, with my knees screaming louder than the alarm I'd finally managed to trip on my way over the top. I quit 2 days later, told corporate it was my knees. Gail didn't ask any other questions, and I think that's because some part of her already knew the answer. The unit's leased again now under a different name. Cash, auto pay, no move-in inspection. I know because I still drive past on Route 9 some nights, slow, windows up. The new night guard's named Ortiz. Young guy, ex-army, good with a radio. His walkthrough runs 47 minutes, same as mine used to. Same order, aisles A through F. I never told him about C14. I never told him what to log. He didn't need me to, because 3 nights ago, at 2:14 a.m., the gate camera caught him standing in front of that door for 6 minutes he can't account for, and he didn't even ask why. Story 2. My name is Dana Pruitt, and for 3 years I ran the lien auctions at Meridian Self-Storage off Route 40. Every Thursday at midnight, 6 or 7 strangers would show up with cash and flashlights to bid on units whose renters had stopped paying. I was good at it, embarrassingly good. I could guess what was behind a locked door before anyone lifted the latch. Unit 114. I told the bidders it would be power tools and a mounted deer head, and I was right down to the antlers. My boss, Mr. Kessler, called that a gift. He said some people just read rooms better than others. I liked being the one who always knew. I used to brag about it at bars, actually. The deer head trick. I'd describe the weight of a locked unit through the padlock alone, like I could feel the balance of what was stacked inside just from how the chain hung. Kessler liked when I told that story in front of new hires. He'd watch their faces more than mine, like he was checking whether they understood something I didn't. The rules were simple. 90 days unpaid, 3 certified notices, and the unit becomes company property. We photograph, we list, we auction. Nobody ever came back to argue. That part never struck me as strange until it did. Mr. Kessler ran the office, but I almost never saw him before sundown. He texted contracts at 2, 3 in the morning, always exact change waiting in an envelope by the time I arrived. I used to joke that vampires make good landlords. He never laughed at that one. I told myself the 2 a.m. texts were just a man who couldn't sleep. The exact change just an old habit from cash businesses. Then I noticed his contracts never had a shadow in the signature line photos, no matter what time of day I scanned them. I chalked it up to bad lighting in the office. The office does not have bad lighting anywhere else. The same 6 buyers came every week. Cash only, no receipts, no questions about condition. They never resold anything. I checked the local pawn listings out of boredom once. Nothing from our auctions ever turned up anywhere else in the county. It was Carl Voss's car that first bothered me. Silver Civic, cracked taillight, still parked in row C 3 weeks after his unit. 114, the Deerhead, went up for auction. Same spot, same expired temp tag flapping off the windshield like he'd just stepped inside for a minute. I went back out to row C the next week, just to look again, telling myself I wanted to double-check the plate number for the file. The temp tag was gone, not peeled off. Gone, like it had never been taped there, though I remembered the exact shade of orange it had faded to. The Civic itself was cleaner than a car should be after 3 weeks of pollen and rain. I pulled his account. Autopay was still active, never missed a payment, not once. Somebody higher up had manually flagged the unit abandoned. I asked Kessler about it over text. He wrote back one line, "Family emergency, don't worry about it, sweetheart." He'd never called me sweetheart before. Then came Renata Ames, Unit 88. Her file said pet supplies and craft materials, and it was, plus a dog collar, tag still jingling. No dog anywhere in the unit or the lot. I remember thinking that was sad. I didn't think it was a pattern yet. I asked Kessler, half joking, if people ever left pets behind in units. He said no, not people, and didn't correct himself. And I let it go because I wanted to keep my Thursday job and my good reputation for guessing right. That night I dreamed about the collar ringing on its own in the dark, and I woke up with my jaw aching from clenching it. Here's the detail I kept explaining away. The units were always warm when I unlocked them. Warmer than the corridor. Warmer than the night outside. Fog would bead on the inside of the metal door, like something had been breathing against it for hours before I ever touched the latch. And I kept guessing right. Every single time. Not just categories, specifics. A left-handed guitar, a size 9 boot with a busted lace. I told myself I was intuitive. I never once asked myself how intuition explains a smell of someone's shampoo still hanging in stale air. I brought it up once to another auction regular, a quiet man named Foss, who always bid last and always won. I asked how he knew what he wanted before the door even opened. He looked at me like I'd asked something rude and said, "Same way you do, I imagine." I didn't sleep well after that, and I stopped trying to make conversation with the regulars. I looked up Carl Voss online one slow afternoon. No obituary, no new address, no forwarding anything. Just his name frozen at the last thing he ever posted, a photo of his cat, 11 months old and never updated again. Renata Ames had the same kind of silence, a stopped clock instead of a goodbye. So I started pulling paper files after hours, telling myself it was curiosity, not suspicion. Every vacate date matched the auction listing date exactly. Not 90 days of notices, not even 90 hours. Someone had backdated every single delinquency the same afternoon the unit went up for sale. I told myself there had to be a clerical reason, a software bug, a lazy employee backfilling dates to close out old paperwork fast. I even called our software vendor to ask if batch editing timestamps was possible. The technician laughed and said our system doesn't allow backdating at all, not even for administrators, not ever. I thanked her and hung up before she could ask why I wanted to know. There was a locked file cabinet in the back office I'd never had a key to. One night Kessler left in a hurry. First time I'd ever actually watched him leave. And even then it was already past 4 a.m., sky still black as tar. I used a paperclip on that lock, and I regret that I was clever enough to do it. Inside was a ledger, handwritten, going back further than the company's digital records. Names in one column, in the other, not furniture descriptions. Height, weight, hair color, temperament. Quiet, compliant, will not resist. I read it 3 times before my hands understood what my eyes already knew. I told myself ledgers like that exist in every industry. Livestock records maybe, or some cruel inventory shorthand I didn't understand yet. Then I found my own aunt's maiden name 3 pages back, marked, resolved 2019, the year she went missing from a rest stop outside Hagerstown. I had forgotten until that moment that I'd ever mentioned her to Kessler at all. Carl Voss, 5'11", brown hair, quiet. Renata Ames, 5'4", brown hair, quiet. The same 6 buyer names appeared beside every entry, over and over, for years, never once purchasing the same category of item twice. I had been calling out human beings like they were dresser sets, and I had never lost the bid once. Thursday came anyway. I told myself I'd call the police after the auction, one more night to be sure I wasn't insane. Unit 114 was back on the list, restocked, the file said. I unlocked it alone at 1:40 a.m. before the buyers arrived, just to check what I already suspected. Carl Voss was inside, wrapped in moving blankets like inventory, breathing shallow and slow, eyes half open and looking at nothing. Warm. He was so warm the fog was still rising off him into the cold air of the corridor, and I finally understood every drop of condensation I'd ever wiped off a door. I touched his hand without meaning to, just to check for a pulse, and it was warm, the way bread is warm right out of the oven, not the way a living person is warm. His fingers twitched once, toward my wrist, so slow it looked like a tape running at the wrong speed. I have never moved backward that fast in my life, and I still don't remember deciding to do it. Kessler was behind me. I never heard him arrive. I never hear him arrive. That's the thing about him I should have clocked years ago. His voice was almost gentle. He said, "People default on more than rent, Dana. Some debts get collected in other ways. We just provide storage until collection." I asked him who he collected for. He smiled like the question was sweet and unnecessary. "You don't bid on that lot," he said. "You just call the price. You've always been very good at calling the price." Somewhere behind him, headlights turned in off Route 40. The regulars right on schedule. I looked at their faces as they passed. Ordinary faces, a woman in a cardigan, a man checking his phone. And none of them looked at Carl twice, like a body in blankets was just Thursday inventory to be handled efficiently. One of them nodded at me, polite, the way you'd nod at a coworker in a hallway. I have never felt less like a person than I did in that nod. I don't remember running exactly. I remember the gate arm was down and my key card didn't work, and I remember standing very still in the fog until the 6 buyers walked past me like I was part of the fixtures. Nobody stopped me from leaving that night. Nobody needed to. I quit 2 days later, told the district office I'd found a better opportunity. Nobody asked follow-up questions. Nobody ever does. At Meridian Self-Storage. I know that now better than anyone. I told myself the auctions would go on with someone else calling numbers, and it would stop being my problem. Last week, a certified letter arrived at my new apartment. It listed a unit at Meridian I have never rented, in a building I no longer set foot in. 90 days delinquent under my legal name. Height 5'4", hair brown, temperament noted, in Kessler's handwriting, as quiet. The auction is scheduled for this Thursday at midnight. I already know, without opening it, exactly what's inside that unit. Story 3. I drive nights because the money's better and the questions are fewer. 3 years on the app, mostly bar runs and airport hops. The occasional drunk who cries in the back seat about an ex. You learn the rhythm of a city after midnight. Who's out, who's hiding, who just wants to be somewhere else. At 2:58 a.m., the app pinged a pickup off Route 17, Fairline Self-Storage, Gate 4. I'd been there before, maybe 6, 7 times over the years, always the same weird energy. Nobody rents a storage unit at 3 in the morning unless something's already gone wrong. The app's map pin didn't match the address it gave me. It said Fairline Self-Storage, but the little blue dot sat 2 lots over, out past the fence, where there's no gate at all. I figured it was satellite lag, the kind that happens near cell towers. I didn't think about it again until later. The lot looked like it always did. Rows of orange doors, one sodium light flickering on and off like it couldn't decide. The front gate propped open with a cinder block, even though the sign said closed after 10 p.m. I'd noticed that block before. I never asked who put it there. She was standing between 2 rows, no bag, no suitcase, nothing but a single brass key clenched so tight her knuckles looked bloodless, mid-30s maybe, cardigan buttoned wrong, staring at the door numbered 237 like it might follow her out. Her hand shook when she lifted the key, and for a second I thought I saw frost on it, thin as breath on glass. It was July. The heat index that week had hit 91, and yet the air around her rippled like a freezer door left open. She got in without a word, seatbelt clicking so hard it startled me. The smell that came with her was strange. Cold metal like a walk-in freezer, not sweat or perfume. I asked where to. She said, "Just drive, please, just drive." I pulled out onto Route 17, figuring she'd give me an address once she calmed down. She didn't. She kept turning the key over in her palm, thumb tracing the numbers stamped into the brass, 2, 3, 7, like a rosary. I've picked up from that lot enough times to notice a pattern I never let myself think too hard about. Every fare from Fairline ends the same way. Short ride, no destination, and a cancel before drop-off registers. I always figured it was glitchy GPS. Storage lots do that to signal sometimes. I used to tell myself the cancellations were just bad signal out there, dead zones between the highway and the lot. But I checked once, out of boredom, and the signal was fine. 5 bars, steady. Whatever canceled those rides wasn't the network. I tried small talk anyway, force of habit. Asked if she needed anything out of her unit, if she'd forgotten something. She looked at me in the mirror like I'd asked something obscene and said, "It doesn't like being paid for." Then she went quiet again. The radio had turned itself on. Nobody's hand near the dash, nobody near the console. Just 3 seconds of static, then silence, like something clearing its throat before deciding not to speak. I reached to turn it off and found the dial already set to off. The static had come from a station that doesn't exist anymore, one that went dark years ago after the tower burned. I know because I used to listen to it as a kid. She twisted around to look out the back window, over and over, checking the road behind us like she expected headlights that weren't there. I checked too. Nothing, just dark asphalt and the storage lot's one bad light shrinking in my mirrors. I slowed for the light at Route 17 in Miller, just a few miles out, and glanced in the rear view to ask again where she wanted dropped. The back seat was empty, seat belt still buckled, door never opened, just the key sitting on the cushion where she'd been, warm, too warm, like it had just come out of a fire. I pulled onto the shoulder so fast my tires screamed a little on the wet asphalt. I checked the trip log on the app. Pickup confirmed, timestamp, GPS pin right at gate 4. Drop off, still in progress. Fare, still active, like she'd never left at all. I sat there a long time with the hazards ticking, staring at that key on the seat. I told myself she must have slipped out at the light, some trick with the door I didn't see. People do strange things at 3 a.m. I've had worse. I decided to end the shift early and go home. I noticed the odometer read 4 miles further than it should have, like the car had driven somewhere without me. I checked the route on the app twice, and both times it matched what I remembered driving. The extra distance wasn't there before I stopped. The heater was running full blast, but the passenger side stayed cold the whole drive home. My breath didn't fog on my side of the windshield. It fogged on hers, in little clouds, blooming and fading like something was still breathing there. When I glanced back at a stoplight, I saw the seat cushion, the fabric pressed down in the shape of someone sitting, still holding its shape, though I was alone in the car. I gripped the wheel and didn't look again until I turned onto my street. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A rating had come in for the trip. 1 star, no name attached, just a single comment. She never leaves the lot. I hadn't ended the trip. The app had ended it for me. I stared at the comment until the letters blurred, then reloaded the app to find the review gone. No trace of it in my history. The support chat had no record of a completed trip at all, just an open one, ticking upward in real time. 41 minutes, 42, 43. I pulled into my driveway at 3:41, killed the engine, and just sat there. The porch light was out. I'd changed that bulb 2 days ago. The key from the back seat was gone. I hadn't touched it, hadn't taken it inside. It was just gone. Inside, the house had that stillness that isn't really stillness, the kind where you can feel someone listening back. The hallway smelled like cold metal again, faint but unmistakable, the same smell she'd carried into my car. I checked my phone's location history out of habit, and it showed a stop at the storage lot that I never made, time-stamped an hour after I'd gotten home. My car hadn't moved. I know because I could still feel the hood ticking as it cooled in the driveway. I went online that night, half out of curiosity, half out of dread, and found a driver forum thread 12 pages deep. Other night shift drivers describing the exact same fare, same lot, same missing woman, same brass key with 3 digits stamped in it. They call it the storage unit ride, like it's a local legend everyone's supposed to laugh off. One post near the bottom said something that stuck with me, that the woman was never really a passenger at all, that she was bait, sent out from whatever's kept locked in Unit 237 to find someone with a car, a route, and a fixed address the app could hand over without anyone asking twice. I heard something drop in my kitchen, a small metallic sound, like a key hitting tile. I hadn't been in there. I told myself it was the cat. I don't own a cat. I found it on the kitchen floor, the same brass key, warped now like it had melted and reset itself. The numbers 237 bent almost illegible. Under my front door was a slip of paper I never put there, torn torn from a rental agreement. My name filled in where hers used to be. I understood then what the app had actually recorded that night. Not a fare, not a trip, but a delivery. My home address, logged automatically the second I ended my shift, sitting right there in a database that doesn't ask what's asking for it. My phone lit up on the nightstand at 4:13 a.m. New ride request, already accepted. No way for me to decline it. Pickup location, my own address. Passenger name, Unit 237. Story 4. This one is yours. This story was sent to me by a woman I will call Casey from a small town outside Dayton, Ohio. She asked me to change a few identifying details, including the real name of the facility, but everything else is exactly how she told it to me. Warren was a quiet man who spent 30 years working the rail yard outside Dayton, and after his wife passed, he mostly kept to himself. When he died in March of a heart problem nobody had caught in time, he left almost nothing behind. No house, a Buick nobody in the family wanted, and one storage unit 30 minutes north on Route 4 at a place I will call Keystone Self-Storage, Unit 214. Casey had not spoken to him in 11 years, since a family argument nobody could quite explain anymore. Route 4. That time of night is mostly dark. A gas station glow every few miles and not much else. She told me she almost turned the car around twice. She could not tell me why she kept going. The facility called her in April about an unpaid balance, $18 and change. She almost let it go to collections and forgot about it completely, the way you forget about an uncle you barely knew. But something about the automated voicemail bothered her, the way the recording read the unit number out twice, slow, like it wanted her to write it down. 2 and 14, 2 and 14. She drove out on a Tuesday night after work just to see it once before she let it go. Keystone Self-Storage sits behind a marathon station on Route 4, 60 units with faded orange doors, a keypad gate that beeps twice when it takes your code. The manager, a woman named Diane, met her in the office to hand over Warren's spare key. Diane mentioned it almost as an afterthought, filing paperwork without looking up. Someone had already been out to Unit 214, twice that week. Casey asked who. Diane pulled up the gate log on an old beige monitor and got quiet for a second longer than felt normal. It was Warren's own code, she finally said. Used at 3:14 in the morning, both nights. Warren had been dead for 6 weeks. Diane's first guess was a software glitch, something left over from a district system update in February that might have worked, except the timestamp was not close. It was exact. 3:14 a.m. on the dot, both nights, like something had set an alarm. They walked out together under security lights thick with gnats, half of them burned out. Diane mentioned, almost to fill the silence, that the whole row Warren rented on shared one old ventilation line between all 6 units, a cheap fix from the 70s. You could sometimes hear a neighbor's radio bleeding through the wall. It was, she said, probably nothing. Casey would remember that detail longer than almost anything else that night. The padlock waiting on 214 was wrong. Warren had used the same scratched brass combination lock her whole life. She remembered it from being a kid, spinning the dial for him in the garage. This was a new keyed lock, silver with a strip of masking tape stuck across the shackle, the edge already curling in the humidity. Someone had written a date on it in blue pen. It was tomorrow's date. Diane said facility policy required a lock swap on any unit 90 days past due, and that the tape was just a maintenance tag, nothing more. It was a reasonable answer. Casey wanted to believe it, but Warren had only been gone 6 weeks, not 90 days, and when she said so, Diane looked at the tape like she was reading it for the very first time. Diane went back inside to check Warren's account history, mostly to get Casey to stop asking questions she could not answer. That is when she found the co-signer, someone listed on the original paperwork only as J. Doe, added to Unit 214 19 years earlier. Diane read the date off the screen twice to be sure. It was the exact week Casey was born. Casey had never even met her uncle until she was 22. She tried to remember if her mother had ever mentioned Warren visiting when she was a baby. She could not think of a single time. She asked Diane to cut the lock. Diane did not want to, said it was not facility property to destroy without a form, but something in Casey's voice made her go get the bolt cutters from the office without another word. The door rolled up on a smell like aqua velva and cold pennies, and underneath it, dust that had not been disturbed in a long time. Inside was a single folding chair facing the doorway and a small portable radio sitting on the concrete floor, playing quiet static tune just off a station. Nobody had told the radio to be on. Near the bottom of the door track at about shoulder height were scratch marks, 4 thin curved lines side by side like fingers dragged down metal. Diane said raccoons sometimes got into the end units through the vent line, but raccoons do not reach shoulder height, and there is only one animal that does. Behind the chair was a cardboard box, flaps open, and it was full of Polaroids, hundreds of them, rubber banded into stacks by year, and every single one, going back as far as the stacks went, was of Casey. Her first birthday, taken through a window she did not recognize. Her middle school graduation, shot from across a parking lot she never noticed anyone standing in. Her wedding, taken from the tree line past the reception tent, from a spot where nobody was supposed to be standing at all. She had never once mentioned that wedding to Warren. Some of the newest photographs were dated from a city 3 states away, where she had moved only 4 months earlier. She had not given anyone that address, not even her own mother. Under the newest stack, still faintly smelling of developer fluid, one more photograph was sitting by itself, face up, like it had just been set there. It showed the inside of Unit 214, the chair, the open door, and Casey, standing exactly where she was standing right then, holding this exact box. The date scrawled on the white border was written in the same blue pen as the tape on the lock. It was tonight's date. She turned around fast to see who could possibly have taken it, but the unit behind her held nothing except Diane, 30 feet back near the office, calling out to ask if everything was all right. She looked back down at the photograph one more time. Just past her own shoulder, in the corner of the frame, near the vent grate on the back wall, there was a shape. The kind you can almost convince yourself is a shadow if you do not look at it for very long. 2 days later, at Casey's insistence, Diane pulled the hallway camera footage mounted directly above Unit 214. They watched it together in the front office with the blinds down, on an old laptop that took almost a full minute to load the file. The footage showed Casey walking up, the lock being cut, the door rolling open, Casey standing inside alone for 6 minutes, looking through a box before walking back out. Nothing else, no second shape near the vent, nothing standing behind her the entire time. The camera never lies, Diane said, trying to sound comforting. Casey never said the camera was lying. She only stopped believing that whatever visits Unit 214 at 3:14 in the morning needs to be seen by anything to be there. The vent cover in the back corner, she noticed on her way out, was already off. It had been sitting there the whole time, dust outline and all, like it had been removed months ago and never put back. My name's Gordon Kepner, 63 years old, 3 months from my pension, and for 11 years I've walked the night shift at the Ash Grove Municipal Museum, corner of Delancey and 9th. It's a good building for a man who likes quiet. Marble floors, dinosaur bones, a wing of Egyptian pottery nobody visits after dark. I clock in at 11, clock out at 7, and in between I walk the same route 400 times a night. That's the job. Predictable. The route never changes. Rotunda, Natural History Wing, the Textile Corridor, back through Antiquities, up to the mezzanine, down again. I sign the guest log at each checkpoint. The log's older than I am, leather-bound, half the pages gone soft with damp. Some nights I talk to the taxidermy elk in the rotunda just to hear a voice that isn't mine. Guys my age who work at security for a living used to trade security guard horror stories over coffee at shift change, the mannequin that moved, the elevator that stopped on a floor that didn't exist. I always figured those stories were how tired men explained empty buildings to themselves. I don't think that anymore. 3 weeks ago, I found an entry in the log for a Tuesday. I never worked. I'd called in sick for my sister-in-law's funeral. I remember it clean as anything. But there it was. G. Kepner, 2:14 a.m., textile wing, all clear. My handwriting, the exact loop in the K, the way I crossed my sevens. I told myself Ray from the day shift must have signed it out of habit. That same week, the closet at the end of the textile corridor started letting a draft through. Cold air with a mineral smell like wet stone, though the closet's a dead end. Mop bucket, spare bulbs, nothing behind it but brick. I've checked 100 times. Old buildings breathe, I told myself, and for a while that was enough. 2 nights later, the corridor itself felt longer. I know how that sounds. I walked it in my sleep for a decade. 41 paces from the Ming vases to the fire door. I could do it blind. That night I counted 56 before I hit the door, and the vases I'd just passed were nowhere in the light behind me when I turned around. I blamed my knees, my eyes, the new bifocals I hadn't broken in. I blamed the 1 glass of whiskey I have every night off, same as always. A man 3 months from retirement gets jumpy, I told myself, starts flinching at his own shadow, counts things wrong. Rational men have rational nights. I've always been a rational man. There's a photo in the break room, all the night watchmen going back to 1958, lined up in front of the rotunda steps like a class picture that never graduates. Frank Alderice trained me, retired 9 years back, hip replacement, moved to Sarasota, sent me a Christmas card most years until he stopped. Last week I noticed there were 9 men in a picture I remembered having 8. I went to the archives on my lunch, badge swiped into records nobody checks anymore, and pulled every guest log going back to when Frank started. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I told myself I just wanted to settle my mind before I clocked out at 7. What I found didn't settle anything. There were entries in my handwriting on nights I hadn't worked in 11 years. My daughter's wedding, jury duty, the week my wife was in the hospital. Dozens of them, going back further than made sense if you looked at the dates too hard, which I made myself not do. I called Ray that afternoon, half hoping he'd laugh and say of course he'd covered. He'd forgotten to mention it. He said he'd never signed my name in his life, not once, and asked why I was asking. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like something you'd tell a doctor. So I went looking for Frank Alderice's employee file instead. His photograph was in there, same mustache, same crooked collar pin I remembered. Under status, it didn't say retired. It said transferred, internal. No department listed, no forwarding address. The Sarasota cards, I realized, had stopped the exact year I stopped being able to picture his face clearly. 9 men, I thought, staring at that break room photo on my way back to my post. 9 men, and one of them still smiling like he hadn't noticed he'd been added. I should have called my supervisor, or just walked out the front door and let them fire me 3 months early. Instead, at 2:40 in the morning, standing at the mouth of a textile corridor that had grown another 20 feet since my last pass, I did the thing 11 years of training told me never to do. I followed it. The overhead lights didn't reach as far as they used to. The display cases changed too. Familiar looms and dresses giving way to glass I'd never cataloged. Blue museum guard uniforms on wire mannequins, buttons dulled with age, and under each one a small brass plate with a name and 2 dates. I read the first plate by flashlight. Frank Alderice. No closing date after the dash, just his hire year and a blank line where the second date should be. Next to him, an older uniform, moth soft at the shoulders, a name I recognize from the 1958 photograph downstairs. Every watchman the museum had ever employed, standing in glass, in the uniform he retired in, and not one of them finished. I understood then, though I didn't want to, why the corridor kept adding rooms every time some watchman turned in his badge. It wasn't renovation. It wasn't my knees, my eyes, the whiskey. The building had been quietly building somewhere to put me, 1 gallery at a time for 11 years, and it had almost finished. At the end of the row stood an empty case, glass polished, wire frame waiting. No mannequin yet, just a brass plate already lettered. Gordon Kepner. The hire date matched mine exactly. Where the second date should go, the metal was smooth, but I could see the faint scratch marks of a stylus that hadn't finished engraving, like something had started and meant to come back to it later. I ran the way I hadn't run since I was 40 pounds lighter, back through corridors that folded shorter behind me the way they'd stretched longer in front of me an hour before, like the building only cared how far I had left to go, not how far I'd come. I hit the fire door at a dead sprint and it opened onto the rotunda, right where it should. For one clean breath, I thought I'd gotten out clean. I clocked out at 7 that morning, same as always. I told Loomis, my supervisor, that I felt sick, true enough, and I didn't go back that night, or the next. I called in for 4 straight days, the longest I'd ever missed, and I meant, God help me, to just not go back at all and eat the loss on my pension. But 3 months is 3 months, and a man doesn't walk away from 31 years of state service over something he can't put in a report without sounding like he belongs in the ward, not the museum. So on the first of the month I signed back in, and the guest log was open on the counter to a page I hadn't written yet. At the bottom, under tonight's date, was an entry in my own hand for a shift 6 weeks from now, 3 days past my retirement. I stared at that line a long while, not because I doubted my own handwriting. I have known that K, that crossed 63 years. I stared at it because under the checkpoint column, where I always write rotunda or textile or mezzanine, someone, some future version of me, had written a location that doesn't exist on any floor plan the museum has ever filed with the city. I've got 11 weeks left on the schedule as it stands. I've thought about quitting outright, forfeiting the pension, moving somewhere with no old buildings and no long corridors. Most mornings that still sounds like the sane choice, but I keep thinking about Frank Alderice's plate with no closing date, and I keep thinking that whatever this building is, it's patient, and patient things don't need you to say yes. They just need you to keep clocking in. Last night I walked the textile corridor one more time, out of a habit I can't seem to break even now. The closet door at the end was open a crack, just wide enough for that cold mineral draft to reach me in the hallway. Past it, where there used to be brick, I could see, only for a second before I made myself turn around, a hallway lit the color of old brass, running farther than any wing this museum has ever had blueprints for. I still sign the log every night the way I always have. G. Kepner. All clear. But 3 nights ago I checked the entry from the night before, the one I definitely wrote in my own hand, time-stamped 3:47 a.m. I have never once stayed on shift past 3 in the morning, and whoever signed that line matched my handwriting perfectly, right down to the little flourish I only make when I'm holding the pen with all 9 fingers of my left hand. I have 10. Story 2. I took the graveyard shift at Meridian Park Garage because Sentinel Star Security paid $11.75 an hour and didn't care that I had a criminal justice degree I wasn't using yet. Downtown, corner of 5th and Locust, 4 levels underground, 1 guard booth by the elevator bank. My shift ran 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 6 nights a week. Badge number 114 clipped to a windbreaker that never quite kept out the cold. The booth had 6 monitors, 1 for each level, plus the street entrance and the stairwell. Half of them were older than me, the kind with a faint hum and a picture that bowed at the edges. My first 2 weeks were boring in the specific way that makes boredom feel like a small mercy. Rounds every hour, radio check with dispatch, coffee from the Folgers can in the break closet. There was a logbook chained to the desk, decades of handwriting in it. Most nights I skimmed it for the standing instructions. One line, written in a different pen than the rest, said no rounds on B3 odd-numbered stalls after 3 a.m. No explanation. I figured it was superstition left behind by some old-timer, and I laughed about it to myself the way you laugh at things you haven't been scared of yet. I asked Vega about it during a radio check, half joking, and she went quiet for a second too long before saying she'd never noticed that line before, though she'd been reading that same logbook for 2 years. She said it like she wanted to believe herself. I told her never mind and let it go, but I started counting the odd-numbered stalls on B3 every time I passed them after that, just to know where they were. 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday, monitor 4 blinked, not off, sideways, the way old tube sets do when the signal drops for a frame. When it came back, the timestamp in the corner read 4:47 a.m. It was 1:12. I checked my phone twice. The picture on the screen showed the B3 ramp, empty, one overhead light strobing on and off in a pattern that didn't match anything actually happening down there, because I'd walked that ramp 40 minutes earlier and the lights were fine. I told myself it was a glitch in the DVR, some cached frame looping out of order. Old systems do that. I went down to B3 myself with my Bushnell flashlight to check the fixture. The light was steady, no flicker, no strobe, nothing wrong at all, which somehow felt worse than finding something broken. I checked the timestamp on the fixture's little maintenance sticker, the kind electricians leave after a service call. It read a date 11 years back, which made sense for an old garage. Except the ink hadn't faded at all, not even at the edges where the sticker had clearly been peeling for years. I told myself different adhesives age differently. I didn't believe it while I was thinking it. I called the security office line for maintenance. No answer, because of course there wouldn't be, not at that hour. When I got dispatch on the radio, Vega just laughed and said the DVR box was older than both of us combined, and that the last guy, Teller, used to complain about it constantly before he quit. Quit was the word Vega used, not fired, not transferred. Quit in the middle of a shift, and nobody had heard from him since. I didn't push on it. I had 6 more hours to go, and a garage full of empty concrete that suddenly felt less empty than before. I looked Teller up on my phone that night, standing in the booth with the monitors humming behind me. There was a listing for a Michael Teller 2 towns over, same last name, but the profile picture was of a man who looked closer to 60 than the 30-something I imagined from Vega's story. No mention of Meridian Park anywhere, no mention of security work at all. Like the years he'd have spent here had just been folded out of his life. 2 nights later it happened again, clearer this time. Monitor 4 showed B3, timestamp 22 minutes ahead of real time, and there was a figure in the frame. Me, standing near stall 13, head down, not moving, like I was looking at something on the ground I didn't want to see. I didn't go near B3 for the rest of that shift. Simple as that. If the camera was showing me 22 minutes from now standing somewhere, then all I had to do was not be there. I felt almost clever about it, the way you feel clever right before you find out you weren't. So I started changing my rounds. If the feed showed me on B2 near the elevator, I'd take the east stairwell instead. If it showed me by the ticket booth, I'd linger upstairs by the gate arm. Every night became a chess match against a version of myself that hadn't happened yet, and every night I won, and every night the feed simply rescheduled the moment for later. The strange part was how good it felt, outsmarting a screen. I started timing my footsteps to the second, proud of myself in a way that should have embarrassed me. Then one night, the feed showed me somewhere I hadn't gone yet and hadn't planned to go, a spot I only ended up walking past 20 minutes later because dispatch rerouted me around a spill on B1. The camera hadn't been guessing. It had been waiting for me to run out of directions. On the 9th night, I finally opened the older pages of the logbook all the way back, past the standing instructions, into entries signed M. Teller, dated June 14th. Not this June 14th. 6 of them, 1 per year, stacked on top of each other like the same night kept trying to happen again. Underneath Teller's signatures, older ink, other names: Voss, Alvarez, Pruitt, all June 14th. All the same 3-word closing note before the entries just stopped. Didn't finish rounds. I flipped further back, expecting the ink to fade into something illegible, some Victorian-looking scrawl to make the whole thing feel safely historical. It didn't. The handwriting stayed clean, modern, ballpoint blue, on paper that should have yellowed decades ago, and hadn't. Whatever kept this logbook wasn't interested in looking old. It was interested in looking like it always could have been tonight. Tonight was June 14th. I went looking for the old tape archive, the little closet behind the booth I'd never bothered to open past the coat hooks. Inside, shelves of DVR reels and dusty VHS cassettes, each one labeled by hand with a date, June 14th, going back further than the garage's own paperwork could explain. I put one in the old deck just to see. It showed a guard in a jacket cut like something from the 90s, moving through B3 the exact way I had 2 nights ago. Same hesitation at the ramp, same glance back over the shoulder, same final turn towards stall 13. I understood then, in the slow, sick way understanding arrives when you don't want it. The footage was never the future. It was a recording of every guard who had ever tried to dodge it. Every route I thought I'd invented, someone else had already walked, already changed, already lost by changing. The garage wasn't showing me tomorrow. It was showing me the loop closing, one adjustment at a time, exactly the way it had closed on Teller, on Pruitt, on a man in a jacket from 30 years ago. I tried calling in sick. I actually dialed the office number, got as far as the second ring, and then found myself hanging up before anyone answered, my thumb moving on its own like it already knew how this went. I told myself I'd just lost my nerve. Looking back, I think the loop doesn't need you to want it. It only needs you to show up, and some nights, showing up looks exactly like changing your mind. I decided the only move left was to make no move at all, stay in the booth, skip the rounds entirely, let the log write itself blank for once. At 4:25, the breaker for the B3 lighting bank tripped on its own, and dispatch radioed that a car alarm had gone off on that level and needed a physical check. Company policy, no exceptions. I stood in the booth another full minute after dispatch signed off, just breathing, watching the blank spot on monitor 4, where B3 should have been lit and wasn't. The car alarm kept going, tinny through the radio speaker, and underneath it, I could hear something that wasn't static. A low, unhurried sound, like someone dragging a boot heel slow across concrete, once, and then not again. I want to say I refused. I didn't. I walked down there with my flashlight because the job made me, because avoiding the walk had somehow become the thing that guaranteed I'd take it on this exact night, at this exact minute, towards stall 13, where the concrete had a scuff mark I'd noticed my very first week and never once thought twice about. I don't remember the next several minutes clearly, and I've stopped trying to force them back. What I remember is standing in the booth afterward, hands shaking too hard to hold the radio, staring at monitor 4 while it showed an empty ramp, steady light, nothing at all, timestamp finally, mercifully matching real time. I clocked out at 7 a.m. like nothing had happened, because as far as the paperwork was concerned, nothing had. I went to sign the logbook closed for the night the way you're supposed to, my hand already forming the letters of my own name. The line was already filled in. Tomorrow's date, tomorrow's shift. My signature already sitting on the page in ink that hadn't finished drying. Story 3. My name is Gil Marchetti, 9 years a detective, 3 years doing this. St. Auburn Memorial, sub-basement, midnight to 7. I sit at a folding table outside the morgue and I sign for the dead when they leave the building. That's the whole job. I used to read the security guard horror stories online, the crawling shapes, the whispering vents, and laugh because the real thing is duller than a DMV line. You check a badge, you check a drawer number, you sign a line that says chain of custody unbroken. Nobody warns you the paperwork is the part that eats you. The van comes at 3:14 a.m., same time every night, driven by a man named Ruiz, who never says more than my last name. Continental Bio Recovery, it says on the door, though the paint's so old it's mostly a shadow. I load, I sign, he drives. 3 years, 40-some drawers a week, and I never once counted how many came back empty the next morning. I noticed once that Ruiz's van never idled. Every other vehicle on that dock coughed and settled before pulling out, engine finding its rhythm. His just moved, smooth from a dead stop, like it had never been off. I told myself it was a newer transmission. I never checked the plates. Drawer 14, second Tuesday of March. Tag reads Marcus Aldana, 61, cardiac. Chart underneath says Aldana was 58 years dead of a fall. I figure it's a clerical mix-up. Hospitals run on typos, and I sign anyway because the box for physician verification is empty and nobody's ever filled it in. I lost my badge over the Whitmore case. Doesn't matter the details. I trusted a paper trail I shouldn't have, and Internal Affairs decided I trusted it on purpose. This job doesn't ask about that. This job just needs a body warm enough to sit in a chair and cold enough not to ask questions. Second discrepancy. A month later, the nightly temperature log shows the same drawer count logged every single night, even the nights I know for a fact we ran empty. I mention it to the day supervisor. She says the system autofills when nobody updates it. I believe her because believing her is easier than the alternative. I asked the supervisor why the autofill always chose the exact same number instead of 0. She said the system defaults to the last valid entry, which made sense until I remembered the last valid entry was from a night we ran 2 drawers over capacity. The math didn't lower, it only ever climbed. Third one, a transfer form for a woman named Delia Ochoa lists a funeral home in Riverdale. I drove through Riverdale once chasing a warrant. There's no funeral home on that street. There's a laundromat and a check cashing place. I tell myself the address is old. I sign anyway. That's the thing about being the only checkpoint. Nobody built a second one, so nobody built a way to catch you being wrong. I was a detective. I know what a system looks like when it's designed, so one signature closes the loop, and mine had been closing it for 3 years without a single question asked back. So one slow Thursday, I pull the archive box myself, the one marked transfers, and I start matching names to registered funeral homes across the state. Half don't exist. A quarter belong to businesses that closed before I made detective. Continental Bio-Recovery isn't licensed anywhere I can find. The drawer hall smells different at that hour, more metal than cold, like a coin held too long in a fist. I stood at the archive box longer than I meant to, listening to the compressor cycle on and off, and somewhere under that hum, I kept hearing a second rhythm that didn't match the machine. I take the box into the drawer hall itself, past the sheets, into the cold light where the numbers are supposed to mean something. 40 drawers. I start opening them against the log, and the log stops matching the room by drawer 6. Drawer 6 should hold a John Doe pending ID. It holds nothing. Drawer 9 should be empty for pickup tomorrow. It holds a man I don't recognize with a tag for a name that was released 2 weeks ago. The bodies aren't leaving when the paper says they leave. They're leaving before, or after, or not the ones the paper names at all. I closed drawer 9 and opened it again, as if the second time might correct itself, the way a bad number sometimes fixes on a recount. It didn't. The man's face had the loose, unhurried look of someone who'd been dead a long while, and his tag still read a name I remembered signing out myself. I understand it the way you understand a bruise before it colors, before the shape of it means anything. The wrongness is already sitting under the skin. My signature isn't verifying a transfer. My signature is the only thing making a transfer legal. Doesn't matter what's actually in the drawer. It matters that Gil Marchetti wrote his name on the line. That's when the fire door at the end of the hall bangs open, and a man I've never seen comes through it fast, breathing like he ran 6 flights. Late 50s, work jacket, hospital lanyard clipped to nothing. He's shouting a name before I even get my hand to the radio. "Where's my son?" he says. "Ethan Voss. They told me he's here. They told me he can't finish it." I tell him security's not supposed to let family down without an escort, and he laughs, this awful cracked sound, and says, "I didn't come through the front. There is no front anymore, not for this." I should call it in. I don't. Something in me, the part that used to be a detective before it became a man with a clipboard, wants to see what he's seen. He shows me a photo on a cracked phone screen, 22 years old. Overdose 3 nights ago, pronounced at 11:40 p.m. by a doctor whose signature I don't recognize either. He wasn't dead, the father says. I talked to a nurse from that shift. She says vitals were never fully flat. She says somebody signed the release before the second confirmation came back. Then she got transferred to a different floor and won't answer her phone. I already know which drawer his son's tag points to, drawer 22. I already had my hand on the drawer before he finished talking, and it was cold in a way the others hadn't been, like it had been open recently and shut again in a hurry. I told myself refrigeration units cycle unevenly. I didn't believe it even as I said it out loud. Drawer 22 holds a man in his 70s. The tag says Ethan Voss, age 22. I stand there long enough that the father starts making a sound I won't describe, and I pull the transfer file to see who authorized the release that put a body labeled his son onto a van 2 days ago, before intake even logged him as deceased. The signature on that form is mine. Dated a night I remember clearly, because it was quiet and I signed a whole stack at once, in advance, the way the supervisor taught me. For efficiency, she said, so the morning rush wouldn't back up the loading dock. I never once thought to ask what I was pre-signing into existence. That's the mechanism. Not forged names, not stolen badges. A stack of blank release forms, my real signature already dried on every line, waiting for someone else to fill in whichever name needed to disappear that week. Ethan Voss wasn't dead when that van left. He just needed to be, on paper, for a few hours. I hear the van outside right on schedule, 3:14. Ruiz's tires on the wet dock. I tell the father to stay behind the drawers and I go up alone. And for one long second in the loading bay, I consider just letting it drive off like every other night. Because that's the shift, that's the job, that's the line I always sign. I don't sign it. I call it in on a landline instead of a radio, the way I used to when I actually trusted the people who'd answer. State police this time, not the hospital switchboard. Ruiz drives off before anyone arrives. The father finds his son alive 4 days later in a private recovery facility 2 counties over. Paperwork clean, no record of St. Auburn ever admitting him. I quit that week. Handed in a resignation letter I didn't sign in advance, just to feel what it was like to write my name, meaning only what it said. I haven't worked a hospital floor since. I told myself that was the end of the chain, my name finally off the paper. Last month, a records clerk I still know from the old department pulled a transfer log for an unrelated case and called me, confused, asking why my signature was on a Continental Bio-Recovery release form dated for next Tuesday. I haven't set foot in that building in 6 weeks. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Bryn from Ohio. She asked us to read it exactly the way she wrote it, so we did. I took the overnight shift at Cardinal Self-Storage on Route 33 back in March, $12 an hour, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly because Unit 131 was on my patrol route. That's my mother's unit. She died in January, and I couldn't afford a truck or a mover, so her whole life sat behind a roll-up door in a 10 by 15 room, and some nights during my break I'd just sit on the concrete outside it. The gate code was 7203. Camera 9 covered row C, where 131 was, though half the time the feed lagged. Silas worked days and handed me the clipboard at 11 with the same joke every time. I wasn't sleeping much that spring, so once or twice I took some of my mother's old sleep aids out of a bottle still sitting in her unit, told myself it didn't count as taking something that was already mine. The bottle had 30 pills in it when she died. I counted them myself before I ever took one. By the second week, there were 31. I told myself I'd miscounted, grief blurred and shaking in a storage unit at midnight, but I hadn't. I put the bottle in my jacket pocket after that, and still, some mornings, it weighed heavier than it should have. My mother alphabetized her spice jars, cinnamon before cumin, always, and her mug sat handle side left in the cabinet, like a museum, only she understood. One Tuesday I noticed her boxes in 131 looked shifted, lids not seated right. 2 nights later, a renter in Unit 88 called the office because a mixing bowl she'd never seen was sitting on top of her own boxes, sorted in with her things like it belonged there. I checked the mixing bowl against my memory before I called it a mistake. It was the blue one with the chipped rim, the one she'd used every Thanksgiving, and I knew for a fact I'd wrapped it myself and taped the box shut in January. The tape on that box was still sealed. The bowl was simply gone from inside it and present somewhere else, like it had walked there on its own. I told myself a renter had mixed up units, an easy mistake in a building full of identical doors. I checked the log. No one else had scanned into row C after midnight in 11 days. Just my badge, over and over. At times I didn't remember standing there. I asked Silas to check his own log for the same nights, thinking maybe his badge had scanned in behind mine by mistake, some clerical overlap that would explain it away. His card reader showed nothing after 10 p.m. every night, clean. I even asked the office to pull the badge manufacturer's audit trail, some deeper record behind the log, hoping for a glitch, a duplicate code, anything. It matched mine exactly, down to the second, like there was only ever one person walking that row. It happened again in Unit 206, a stranger's unit 2 rows over. Spice jars I recognized down to the chipped label on the cumin lined up in alphabetical order on a shelf that wasn't mine to touch. Someone was rebuilding my mother's kitchen one drawer at a time, in the wrong rooms, and doing it exactly the way she would have. I stood in 206 for a long time after that, breathing in a smell I hadn't noticed until then, her hand cream, lavender, and something waxy underneath, thick in air that should have smelled like cardboard and concrete dust. It was strongest right where the jars sat. I put my hand where hers would have been on the shelf, and the cold coming off the metal felt like it had been touched a minute before. Then I started losing time. I'd blink at the front gate with no memory of walking there from row C. My shift log had gaps I couldn't account for, 15-20 minutes gone clean. I told myself it was grief, exhaustion, the pills. I didn't tell Silas. I didn't tell anyone. I found a note taped inside 206's door that I hadn't written. My handwriting, but rounder, looser, the way my mother used to loop her lowercase g's. It said, "Remember the commune. I don't loop my g's. I never have." I photographed it on my phone to prove to myself later that I hadn't imagined it. And when I checked the photo back in my car, the note in the picture was blank. I decided to check the cameras myself before I said anything to management. I pulled the footage from row C from 3 nights back, the night the mixing bowl turned up in 88, and sat alone in the office with the monitor light the only thing on in the building. The feed from row C kept stuttering the way it always did. 3 seconds gone here, 4 there, small enough that I'd never questioned it before. Watching for something specific, I counted the gaps, and they added up to exactly the missing time from my own shift log, minute for minute. I told myself cheap equipment glitches and patterns sometimes. I didn't believe it even as I said it out loud to an empty office. It was me, 3:11 a.m., timestamp in the corner, and it was me, standing outside 131, opening the lock like I'd done it 100 times, carrying a jar down the row, humming, calm, talking to someone who wasn't there, setting it down in 206 with both hands, adjusting it a half-inch left until it was right. I told myself it was some kind of fugue, that grief does strange things to a body. I decided to stay awake through the whole shift and watch myself on the monitors instead of walking the floor. I sat in the office chair with every screen lit and told myself I would not close my eyes. The room smelled like her kitchen before I even opened my eyes. Cinnamon and dish soap, warm in a way concrete rooms never are. I could hear humming that wasn't coming from my own throat, or maybe it was. I couldn't tell anymore where my body ended and whatever was using it began. I blinked and I was already in the aisle. Unit 131 was open in front of me, roll-up door rattling on its track, my hands full of my mother's mixing bowls, and the whole thing felt warm and easy and correct, like coming home to a kitchen that still had someone in it. On the monitor behind me, I could see myself doing it, sorting, humming her tune under my breath, and I couldn't make my body stop or my mouth close. I just watched my own hands finish what they'd started, jar by jar, until it was right. I quit 2 days after that. I told the new guy to keep an eye on 131 if things started moving on his watch and left it at that, because I didn't know how to say the rest of it out loud. While I was clearing out my locker, I found an incident report from 2009, filed by a guard named Reyes. Same row, same complaint. 6 years before my mother ever rented that unit. The footage attached to it showed him arranging a stranger's spice jars in alphabetical order inside 131, in a hand that wasn't his, and nobody had ever come to clear out what he left behind. The Cherry Fork County Probate Office hired me on a Tuesday, case number 88-114, to run a definitive survey on a parcel called Coates Hollow, 214 acres, disputed since 1936, never once cleanly plotted in 90 years of filings. I've done boundary work in 6 states. I took the job because it paid double and because, frankly, nobody else in the county would drive up there. Route 619 dead ends into a fire road the county hasn't graded since Reagan. Frost advisory on the radio, mid-October, mist still sitting low in the hollows like it hadn't decided to leave. I found the property corner easy enough, an iron gate half rusted into the hillside, exactly where the 1961 plat said it would be. I set my hand on the brass monument cap to log the coordinates, and that's when I saw it. Engraved into the metal, small, deliberate, WG 1961. My initials. I have never in my career set a stake in that hollow, and I was 11 years old in 1961. I told myself Grissom's a common enough name in this county, half the phone book. Some other W. Grissom set that monument 60 years back. Coincidence, nothing more. I logged it, moved on, started my traverse north toward the chestnut oak the deed called for. The deed said 900 feet, straight bearing, north 9 degrees east. My total station said the ground didn't cooperate. The line curved around a ridge shoulder like something had routed it that way on purpose, decades before GPS, decades before anyone could have known the terrain that precisely without walking it 100 times. An hour in, I smelled wood smoke where the plat showed nothing but unclaimed timber. No structures on the tax rolls, no addresses, no power lines feeding in. I followed the smell anyway, because that's the job. You plot what's actually on the ground, not what the county thinks is there. There were cabins, 6, maybe 8, weathered gray, chinked with old clay. Nothing on any plat I'd ever seen filed for Coates Hollow. An old woman sat on a porch step shelling beans into her apron, and before I said a word, she looked up and said, "Morning, Walter." I hadn't told her my name. She offered me well water in a tin cup and asked if the county still owed her people for the 36 timber rights. I asked how long her family had lived in the hollow. She smiled like the question amused her and said, "Long as there's been surveyors." I didn't understand yet what she meant by that. Back at the Jeep, my radio, off the whole drive, was playing a low, looping recitation, names and years over and over in a flat monotone. Grissom, 1961, Pruitt, 1954, Ellis, 1937. I told myself it was CB bleed-through from some trucker's relay, and I turned the dial until it stopped. I pulled the archived 1937 survey that night by satellite phone, had the clerk read it to me over a bad connection, filed by W. Grissom. No relation on record to me, none listed, nothing, but the clerk mentioned, almost as an aside, that the signature on file looked like it had been traced from a modern hand, my hand. The deed described the northeast corner as marked by an iron pin. What I found was a white oak with a full rack of deer antlers nailed 6 feet up the trunk, weathered soft with age, dozens of years of rain. Someone had been maintaining that corner. Someone had decided the county's iron pin wasn't the real marker at all. Denny Coates met me at the boundary that afternoon. The claimant himself, thin, sunburnt, younger than his file photo suggested. He shook my hand too long and said, "Glad the county finally sent somebody willing to walk it." There was something in how he said willing that I chose not to ask about. On the ridge above his cabin I found the tree, a big beech, bark smooth enough for carving, covered corner to corner in initials and years. WG 1961, RP 1954, JE 1937, FM 1971, TH 1989. Names I half remembered from county cold cases, missing persons files nobody ever closed. Every surveyor sent up this hollow since the Depression, cut into the same tree, like tally marks. I understood then that Coates Hollow had never had a deed anyone could stand on, because the hollow itself made sure of it. Every man sent to plot it truly, honestly, corner to corner, got folded in instead, fed a name, a cabin, a family line that keeps growing feral and quiet in a place no map agrees exists. I tried to walk out the way I'd come. My own GPS log from an hour earlier showed a straight line back to the gate. The ground under my boots showed a ridge that hadn't been there on the way in. I checked the log twice. It didn't match the world. Denny found me on that ridge before dark, and this time, he didn't shake my hand. He said the petition was his idea, filed clean, filed knowing exactly what the hollow does to a man who measures it true. He said his grandfather did the same thing to the surveyor before him, back in 1961. He said someone always has to be the one who gets to leave. They didn't drag me anywhere. Nobody raised a hand. The old woman just set another tin cup on her porch rail, and the children at the tree line stopped staring and went back to their game, like I'd already been counted. That's the part county files never mention about a feral people encounter out past the last grid road. How gently it happens, how much it looks like being welcomed home. I finished the survey. Every corner, every bearing, all 900 feet true to the antler marker and not the rusted pin. It felt at the time like the only honest thing left to do with my hands. The Cherry Fork Probate Office received the completed plat by mail 4 months later, postmarked from a town 2 counties over, in my handwriting, my seal, my signature dated correctly. The clerk who filed it told me the case closed clean, first time in 90 years. She never asked why the acreage on the final plat came out to 215, one more than the deed had ever claimed. Story 2. Dispatch called it in at 9:42 p.m. 2 overdue hikers off the Blackfern Ridge Trail, Mara Doyle and Chris Voss, last seen near mile marker 4. County storms had knocked out 2 of our 3 units, so it was just me, Medic 12, solo, which wasn't protocol, but out here protocol bends to what's available. I've driven Route 9 up the mountain 100 times past the feed store and the last working streetlight in the county. That night the fog sat low on the switchbacks, thick enough that my headlights just bounced it back at me. I remember thinking it was a bad night to be lost outside. At the trailhead I geared up fast. Headlamp, radio, jump bag, the whole kit. The wooden marker post at the trailhead had fresh white paint slapped over something older underneath, like somebody had covered up the original trail number in a hurry. I didn't think much of it. People vandalize signs out here all the time. 20 minutes in, my radio started eating static earlier than the dead zone usually starts. I keyed it twice, got nothing back but a hiss. I told myself the storm had knocked something loose on the repeater tower. That's the thing about strange details out here. There's always a boring reason ready to hand you. That's when the lantern light showed up between the trees. A man, a woman, and a boy, maybe 9 years old, walking toward me slow and easy, like they weren't surprised at all to see me. The man raised a hand before I even called out. He said, "Evening, Amber. We got your hikers." I hadn't said my name. I hadn't said anything yet. I told myself dispatch must have relayed it over a shared channel, that maybe he'd caught it on a scanner of his own. Plenty of folks up here keep one on the porch. It bothered me for exactly as long as it took him to smile and tell me the hikers were warm and safe at his place. His name was Elias Hurley. His wife Ruth didn't say much, just nodded and held the boy's hand. Gabe, they called him. He carried the lantern the whole way, and I remember being grateful, honestly. Grateful in that stupid, relieved way you get when someone else has already done the hard part of your job for you. We walked together back through the trees, away from where my truck sat glowing faintly through the fog. Elias said their cabin was close, that they'd found the hikers near the creek, half frozen, and carried them home themselves. I asked if I could radio it in. He said the trees ate signal out this deep, same as always, and I believed him because I'd already lost mine twice that night. It had been raining most of the evening, ground soft and dark with it, but Ruth's boots were dry. Elias's too. I noticed it the way you notice a word spelled wrong in a sentence you're not really reading. There, then gone, filed under later. Their dog met us part way, some rough-coated mutt that trotted alongside until we crossed a shallow gully, and then it stopped dead and wouldn't come further. Ruth called it twice. Elias just said he don't like the low ground and kept walking like that explained everything. I remember laughing a little, the nervous kind. The lantern in Gabe's hand never wavered, not once. Not when the wind picked up hard enough to push fog sideways through the trunks. A flame that's steady in wind like that isn't natural, but I was cold and tired and thinking about warm bodies and paperwork, so I let it go. You'd be surprised what you let go when someone's smiling at you and calling you by name. The cabin appeared out of the fog, low and long. Log walls hung thick with hides, one window glowing amber. Ruth held the door for me like I was expected company. Inside it smelled like wood smoke and something older underneath that, something like a root cellar that hadn't been opened in years. I asked to see the hikers right away. Elias said they were resting in the back room, that the cold had gone deep into them, and that I should warm up first, have some coffee, let them sleep a little longer before I woke them for the walk out. Every word out of him was soft, patient, reasonable. I sat down because it seemed rude not to. That's when I noticed the wall behind the stove. Hung among the deer hides and old traps were things that didn't belong there. A cracked EMS radio, a county fire patch gone gray with age, a badge clip with the pins still fastened. My eyes moved over them once and my brain, very quietly, started screaming. I pulled up my GPS unit under the table, casual, like I was just checking the time. The blue dot showed we hadn't walked toward the trailhead at all. We'd walked 2 miles deeper into the ridge, away from every road on the map. Every small wrong thing from the last hour lined up at once. The paint over the sign, my name before I gave it, the dry boots, the lantern that never guttered. None of them were separate anymore. I stood up too fast and said I needed to check my patience now, not later. Ruth's face didn't change. Elias just said, gentle as ever, "There's time, Amber. There's always time out here." He said it like a fact of the mountain, not a comfort. I didn't wait for permission. I crossed the room and pushed open the back door myself, into a room lit only by what light leaked in behind me. 2 shapes lay under wool blankets on the floor. Still, too still, and when my headlamp found them, I saw skin gone the color of skim milk, and lips gone blue-black at the edges. They'd been dead for hours, long before Elias Hurley ever said my name in the dark. Elias stood in the doorway behind me, unbothered, the lantern still burning perfectly still in his hand. He told me, almost kindly, that the call had come from their own line, that it always did, that a soft voice on a scratchy radio pulling for help works better than any trap they'd ever built. He said his grandfather did it, and his grandfather before him. He said, "We don't bring you out, we just walk you in." I don't remember deciding to run. I remember the door frame under my palm, and then just trees, endless trees, my headlamp swinging wild light across trunks that all looked the same. Somewhere behind me, Ruth called my name once, calm, unhurried, like she already knew which direction I'd go. About a quarter-mile out, my boot caught something buried in the mud, hard and flat. I didn't stop to look until I was well past it, and when I finally did, my headlamp caught a rusted metal placard half sunk in the dirt, carved crude with names and unit numbers going back decades. Mine wasn't on it yet. That was the part that got me moving again faster than fear alone ever could. I found the trailhead an hour before dawn, half frozen, radio suddenly alive again the second I crossed some invisible line back toward the road. Dispatch asked me twice to confirm my location before they'd believe I was walking, not being carried. I told them the hikers didn't make it. I didn't tell them the rest, not that night. Later that week, our supervisor pulled the original 911 audio for the incident report, the call that had sent me up there in the first place. He played it for me once, just to confirm the timestamp. The voice on it was a woman's, soft, patient, asking for help in a cadence I recognized immediately. The same unhurried, gentle rhythm Ruth Hurley used calling my name in the dark. He also told me, almost as an afterthought, that the same recording, same voice, same words, same soft plea for help, was on file 3 separate times before mine, going back to 1971. Each time, the responding unit came home short-staffed by one. Story 3. My name's Caleb Ward. I'm 22, and I guide weekend hikes out of an outfitter shop off Route 219 near Beckley when I'm not failing chemistry at Concord. Last October, I took 2 friends, Danny and Priya, up onto Black Fern Ridge for what was supposed to be a 2-night trip before midterms buried us. The trailhead register at the ranger kiosk still had my signature from a solo trip that July, right above the blank line I filled in that Friday morning. We set up camp in a clearing about 4 miles in, my Kelty tent and Priya's E&O hammock strung between 2 hickories, Danny's Coleman stove hissing while he burned the eggs. It was 6:40 by my watch, the kind of gold October light that makes the whole ridge look like it's on fire without the fire. Nothing about that first hour felt wrong. That's the part I keep coming back to. Around 9, the insects went quiet all at once, not gradually, like someone had cut a wire. Danny joked that we'd scared off the bugs with his cooking. I laughed, but I remember checking my watch, 9:04, because the silence had a shape to it, like something was holding its breath along with the ridge. That's when I saw it, or saw where it was, 40 feet back in the tree line, a patch of dark that didn't match the rest of the dark, not moving. Not an animal's kind of stillness. An animal shifts its weight, blinks, breathes visibly in cold air. This didn't. I told myself it was a black bear sitting still to figure out if we were food or trouble. Bears do that. I've seen 3 in 6 years of guiding, and none of them ever stood upright the way this thing seemed to, tall and narrow between 2 trunks like it was wearing the shadows instead of standing in them. It watched us for what Danny later swore was over 2 hours, and it never took 1 step closer. That's the detail nobody believes when I tell it now. Predators close distance. This thing kept its 40 feet like a rule it had made for itself, and somehow that was worse than if it had come. Second night, Priya went to get water from the stream about 60 yards off and laughed at something. That easy laugh of hers, half a beat before she'd usually let one out. Except when she came back to the fire 2 minutes later, she said she hadn't laughed at all. We heard it again 10 minutes later, her laugh coming from the tree line this time, not the stream. Danny turned his headlamp on the trees and got nothing back but bark and black space. Priya didn't laugh again for the rest of the trip, not once, like she'd decided her own voice wasn't safe to use anymore. We told ourselves it was an owl, a fisher cat, wind doing something weird in a hollow log, the kind of explanations you build fast when you need to sleep. By 6 a.m. we were packing without talking about it, and we hiked out 4 miles in under 90 minutes, which for Danny's knee was basically a sprint. I dropped them both off before noon, told my mom I was home early because of weather, and slept 11 hours. For about 3 weeks after that, I genuinely believed I'd gotten away clean. That belief is the only part of this story I'm embarrassed by. The first thing I noticed was the armchair in the living room, the one my dad left behind, always angled toward the TV at maybe 15 degrees off center because the carpet dents wouldn't let it sit straight. One Tuesday, it was dead square to the screen, sitting exactly in the carpet dents like it had never been anywhere else. I asked my mom if she'd moved it. She said no, then a second later said maybe. She couldn't remember, in a tone that didn't match the question. Too even, too fast for someone deciding whether she remembered moving furniture. Then it was the photo on the stairwell wall, me at 9 years old holding a trout at Summersville Lake. Except in the version that had hung there my whole life, I'm wearing my orange life vest, and now I'm not. And there's no unzipped vest lying anywhere in the frame like I'd taken it off. I stood on the stairs for 10 minutes, trying to remember which version was true. The laugh was the one that finally scared me. Not because it was different, but because it was almost exactly the same, just delayed. A half-second late every single time. Like she was listening to a recording of herself through a thin wall before she let it out of her own mouth. Our dog Biscuit, 12 years old and half blind, wouldn't come into the kitchen anymore if she was standing at the stove. He'd get to the doorway, stop, and just point his nose at her like he was trying to place a smell that used to mean something specific to him and no longer did. I called Danny to ask if anything felt off at his place too, half hoping he'd laugh me off the phone. He didn't laugh. He said his mom had started calling him by his middle name, Robert, which nobody in his family had used since his christening, and she said it like it was normal, like it had always been his name. I asked him straight out if he thought something followed us out of Blackfern Ridge. There was a long quiet on the line, longer than a bad signal, and then he said, in a voice that sounded almost right, "Followed you, man, not me." Then the call dropped, and he didn't answer when I tried back. I spent that whole night on forums for feral people stories out of the Appalachians, the ones rangers won't put in official reports. Tales of hollows where hikers describe something human-like that watches from 40, 50, 60 feet and never closes the gap. Every account said the same thing about the ones who made it home. They didn't stay scared of the woods. They got scared of their houses instead. I understood it then, sitting in my dark bedroom at 2 a.m, with Biscuit refusing to come past the door. It wasn't hunting me for anything I'd done wrong out there. It was working through everyone close enough to notice I'd changed, one detail at a time, replacing the people who might ask where I went, so that when I finally walked back into Blackfern Ridge on my own, there'd be no one left who thought that was strange. I decided to test her without telling her what I was doing. I asked what she used to call me when I was little and scared of the dark, a private word only she and my dad ever used. Bug, short for lightning bug, because I used to carry one in a jar to bed. She smiled and said, "Sweetheart," like she was reaching for the word and grabbing the wrong drawer. That was the moment the floor of the whole situation dropped out from under me. Whatever was sitting across the kitchen table wearing my mother's cardigan and her reading glasses had her face down perfectly and her voice down almost perfectly. But it didn't have the 22 years of small private words that make a mother instead of a photograph of one. I drove to Priya's apartment that night without calling first. She opened the door fine, herself, sharp and irritated at being woken up, and for one relieving second I thought maybe it was only my house. Then she said something about the trip that we both knew wasn't true, that none of us had seen anything in the tree line at all. Said it flatly, like a fact she'd always believed. I understood then it wasn't just my mother. It was working outward in rings, my house first because I lived there, then the people who talked to me most, quietly correcting anyone who might one day say, "Wait, when did he start acting like that?" Or, "When did that chair move?" It wasn't erasing me, it was erasing my witnesses. I thought about running, some other state, new number, but everything I'd read about feral people stories out of these hollows said distance never mattered to the ones that walk out of the ridge with you. They're patient, past anything a normal fear response accounts for. I decided the only honest move left was to go back to Blackfern Ridge myself and find out exactly what it wanted before it finished with the people around me. I drove up on a Thursday, alone, and parked at the same trailhead kiosk from the July trip, the one with my old signature still sitting there in faded ink. I meant to walk in maybe half a mile, just far enough to prove to myself I still had a choice about whether to keep going. The register was open on its little wooden shelf, rain-warped pages flapping slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel anywhere else on my skin. I found my July entry first, then Friday's entry from the camping trip. Then I found a third line in my own handwriting, my own specific slant on the letter G, signed for a solo overnight permit, dated for the following Tuesday, 5 days from then. I never signed that line. I know because I hadn't decided to come back until the moment I was standing there, reading it. Whatever is wearing my house right now has already agreed, on my behalf, to bring me back on Tuesday, and there is no one left at home who would think to stop me, or even notice I was gone before the ridge did. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Lori from West Virginia. She asked us to read it exactly the way she wrote it, so this is her in her own words. I was 7 the summer my dad decided we would camp off Route 60 outside Rennell. Just him, my mom, my older brother Denny, and me. Dad had a green Ford Bronco and a Coleman lantern that never lit right, and he liked to pretend he knew those mountains better than he did. We set up near a creek bend the ranger station did not officially list, because Dad liked places that were not on any map. Mom packed the igloo cooler with bologna sandwiches and red pop, and Denny and I caught crawdads until the light went orange, then gray. Around 9, Dad decided to drive back out for firewood, and that is when it went wrong. The dirt road he had come in on was not there anymore, or he could not find it, and the Bronco's gas gauge sat under a quarter tank. He came back to camp 2 hours later on foot, and he was not talking like my dad. That is the wrong detail nobody in my family ever wanted to explain to me later. My father, who could find his own truck in a parking lot with his eyes closed, told us he could not find our own campsite for 2 hours in the dark, on a road he himself had driven in on. While he was gone, 3 people came to the edge of our firelight. They did not call out. They just stood there, past where the light gave out, and Mom pulled Denny and me behind her like we were being weighed against something. Mom kept saying, real quiet, that they were probably hunters, that hunters did not need a reason to stand in the woods at night. I remember her hand shaking on my shoulder the whole time she said it. When Dad came stumbling back into the light, he did not seem surprised to see them. He walked right up close to the tree line and started talking low, and I could not hear the words, only the shape of his voice going soft and careful, like he was asking a favor from someone he owed money to. I only heard one part clear because he raised his hand and pointed it right at me. He said, "Her, later," and then something I could not make out, and one of the shapes in the trees made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Whatever he said after that worked, because within the hour he had the truck running, and he knew the road out like he had never lost it at all. Nobody in my family spoke about that night again. Not once. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at funerals. Not ever. I grew up, moved to Charleston, got a normal life, a husband, a mortgage, the kind of life where you forget the woods owe you anything. I would stumble across feral people's stories about these mountains sometimes, late at night on forums, and always close the tab, because I did not want to know if any of them sounded like that night. Last Tuesday, my phone rang from a number with no area code I recognized, just a string of zeros. I almost did not answer it. The voice on the other end was dry, like leaves, and it called me Pip, which is what my father called me, and only my father, and only back then. It said, "Pip, 30 years is a long time to make a body wait." Then it said the date, that exact date in August, like it was reading it off something. Then it hung up, and right before the line cut, I heard wind moving through a lot of trees, close to the receiver, like whoever it was stood outside, not in a house at all. called my father that night, 78 now, oxygen tank, bad hip. I asked him straight out what he said to those men at the tree line in 1991. He went quiet on the phone long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, I told them they could have wood, tools, the truck, spare tank, anything. And they said no to all of it, real polite. So I told them they could have you, later, when you were grown, if they got us home safe that night. I figured later would never come, Lori. I figured we would be long gone from those mountains by later. He was crying by the end of it, this man who never cried at anything, not even his own mother's funeral. He kept saying he thought it was just words to get us out of those woods, that he did not think anything in those hills kept a promise for 30 years. I told him I had to go. I did not tell him where. I am on Route 60 right now, past Raynell, past the ranger station that still does not list that creek bend on any map, because the voice on the phone gave me turns to take, and every single one of them has been right so far. The fog is thick enough that my headlights just fold back into it, and my gas gauge is sitting under a quarter tank, same as his did, which I did not notice until just now. There is a clearing ahead with firelight in it that should not be there, this deep off the road, this late, with no other car parked anywhere near it. I can see shapes standing at the edge of that light, patient the way you are patient when you already know something is yours. The strangest part is not the fire, or the shapes, or even that they knew to call me Pip. It is that when I checked my phone just now for the time, there were 6 missed calls logged from that same number, one every year, always on this date, going back to the exact August my father made his deal. And I never once heard my phone ring for any of them until this year. You have been listening to Hear the Horror, true stories, rebuilt in full sound. If you carry a story of your own, send it in. The next one could be yours. New episodes every Thursday and Sunday. Sleep well, if you can.